Welcome to this Wise Owl tutorial on using AI tools to help you write your Python code. And here's what you'll learn during this tutorial. So we'll begin by looking at preparing to write Python. So I'll show you briefly how to set up Visual Studio Code as a programming environment. Then we'll look at how you can use AI tools to write Python programs, and possibly more importantly, how you can then get them to write simpler Python code so things are easier to understand and you restrict the AI tools' tendency to show off. We'll then look at how you can get AI tools to debug the programs you've written to find bugs, how you can get them to refactor your code, basically rewriting it to make it easier to read, and how you can get AI tools to critique your code to point out areas where it may run slowly or inefficiently, or may be prone to bugs. And finally, I'll look at the important topic of researching modules. So it's often the case if you're writing a Python code on a very specific niche area, you want to know which the best module you can import is, and AI is a fantastic tool for finding that out. But I think that's enough of looking at me. I'm going to vanish now, and let's get started. So what we're going to do to begin with is just look at a way to get Python on your Windows computer. This is not the only way, but it works for me. So we're going to look at installing Python, and then look at installing what's called an integrated development environment called Visual Studio Code, which is as good as any choice for a place in which you can write your Python code. We'll look at installing the Python extension so that you can actually write Python. And then we'll look at changing your settings in Visual Studio Code to make it a bit easier to use. And one more quick thing, we'll look at installing the Code Runner extension. If you're an experienced programmer, of course, you can miss all this bit and go straight on to the second part of this tutorial. So the first thing to do is install Python on your machine. You can do that by going to the Microsoft Store, and if you then search for Python, it will come up with all the different versions. If you choose probably the latest one, which in this case is 3.13, click on that and you can download it. I'm then going to open the installer file, and after a short pause while Python is installed, you should end up looking at this command window, and what you can do is click on that to close it down. So the next thing to do is to go to the Visual Studio Code website, easily done by Googling Visual Studio Code, and click on Download for Windows. You can see it's automatically creating the download at the top right of the screen, and when this is finished, I can click on that to open the file, and then I can choose I accept the agreement. I can choose the default location. I'm going to call it Visual Studio Code. I'm definitely going to keep that box ticked saying Add to Path, and then I'm going to install it. And again, after a short pause I didn't show you, I can click on this button and it will launch Visual Studio Code. The first thing I'll do before I do anything else is just to choose my theme, because I hate the dark theme. I'll come to more on configuring settings in a second. So the third thing I've got to do in my whistle-stop tour of getting set up for Python is click on this button to choose an extension. You can see Python is listed as one of the most popular extensions. If it wasn't, I could just search for it. And then what I can do is click on the little link to the right of that and choose to install it. It will only take a second or two, and it will install not just Python, but also something called a linter, so that it'll make it easier for me to write Python code. So the fourth thing I'm going to do is configure my settings. To do this, I'm going to open up a folder, and I'm going to go to the C drive, because I created a folder called Wise Owl. So before I can do anything else, I have to say I trust the authors of the folder, which I do. And you'll see within this there's a file called jsonsettings.json. I'm going to click on that and copy the entire contents of it. Pressing Control-A will do that nicely, followed by Control-C. And then if you click on this little gear icon at the bottom left of the screen and choose Settings, what you can then do is go to what's called JSON. And the icon to get to that is this one here. If I click on that, I can paste in everything I've got there. I can then save my changes. And what all this will do is completely change the way in which Visual Studio Code works. So I can now close down all these windows, and I've got a working copy of Visual Studio Code. What I now need to do is one last quick thing. I'm going to install the Code Runner extension. To do that, I can click once more on Extensions. I can choose Code Runner and then install it. And again, it will only take a second or two. Yes, I do trust the publisher. So do a lot of other people. And I can now write my first program. So to do that, I can click on this little plus icon. I can choose to create a file. Let's call it test.py. Press return. and I can write in my first Python code. So I'm going to say print, say twit. And then if I want to run that, what I can do is click on this little drop icon and choose Run Code. I can also press Alt-Control-N. What I should do is display the output at the bottom of the screen in a neat format. So it's been a very quick tour of how you can set up Python to work in Windows and Visual Studio Code. As I say, if you're an experienced programmer, hopefully you can now rejoin us. So what I want to do now is to create a program which will list out all of the external links. I'm going to choose lorryspotting.com, one of my favorite websites, and find all the other websites that this site references. So to do this, I can go to my favorite AI tool, whatever that may be, and type in a program or prompt rather like this. You're an experienced programmer with the ability to explain things to less experienced people in concise English without filler words or unnecessary jargon. You like to indent your code? Actually, in Python, you have to indent your code so that it looks neat and to add brief comments explaining what you're doing at each stage of the process. So write a Python program including a comment at the start explaining that it was created by an AI tool, just so someone doesn't try to pass it off as human created, and here's what it should do. So I said, for any given website URL, list out all of its external links in a table, giving for each link the URL, uniform resource locate or website address, being linked to, and the visible text. So what I'm going to do now is try running that. I'm very wary whether it will give me the answer immediately. It's not. It's thinking longer for a better answer. Now, last time I ran this, it took over a minute to come up with an insanely complicated answer. So this time, after that slight glitch, I clicked on skip, and it will come up with a fairly simple answer, which is much better, I think. It really was impossible to understand what it created when I used the long thought version. So what I can do is try copying that and then running it in my Visual Studio Code. So in Visual Studio Code, I might as well use the test.py, which I set up earlier. I can paste this program in and then see if I can run it, but it absolutely, definitely isn't going to work because it imports a module called Beautiful Soup, which I haven't yet installed, also one called URL parse. So what I'm going to have to do is go to my terminal window. I could do that by choosing View Terminal or pressing Control and then single inverted comma. What I need to do then is to install two modules, but probably not the two modules I mentioned initially, because it turns out that the URL lib module is actually a built-in module. You can see that because if you go to the list of the built-in modules, it's easy enough to find with a simple Google search. And if you go to the use, you can see URL lib is listed there. So that doesn't need importing. But the one which does need importing, which I didn't mention, is requests. So I missed that one out. So this is going to install two modules, request, which allows you to get information from websites, and beautiful soup, which allows you to then pass that into the different HTML tags. Only I need to include beautiful soup 4, which is the latest version. Otherwise, this will generate an error. How do you know all this? How do you know what pip install means? I don't know the answer to that question. It's probably beyond the scope of this tutorial. Probably what we should have done is in our AI request, we should have asked it to list out the modules it was referencing and how to import them. So if I run that, it's going to take a while to install those different modules and also any contingent ones or any ones dependent on them. So what I can now do is to run my program, but it's not going to be quite that simple because what the ChatGPT has done is create a function called list external links. And if I run this code, all it will do is create that function, but won't actually run it. So what I need to do is to uncomment this line, which actually calls the function, and put in this the website address I want to go to. So I can copy the lorry spotting website address from here and paste that in as the argument, as it's called, to go to my function. Now, with a bit of luck, when I run this, I'll find out whether this AI code works. And you can see it's worked absolutely perfectly. But I think the fact that I had to import the modules and then uncomment this line illustrates the central problem which is going to crop up in every single tutorial I do on programming with AI, which is when it goes very slightly wrong, how do you know how to tweak and correct it? I will go back to the same point, which is I think AI is a fantastic tool for helping you program, but only if you already know the underlying language. I am a realist when it comes to programming, and one of the problems I have is when I use ChatGPT to generate code, it comes up with ideas and modules which I've never heard of, and I just want something which works. So what we're going to do now is look at simplifying code with this prompt. And as always, this is included in the list of prompts attached to this video on our website, so you could use it if you like as a standard template. Please write a Python program to go to the website, which I'll provide in a variable below at the bottom, and list out all of its external links in a table. So it's going to do exactly what the previous one did, giving for each link the URL being linked to and the visible text. I want this program to be easy to understand, so here's some guidelines to help you. Before the program, list any external modules you've relied upon and give the pip installation command for installing them. So that would have got over the problem where I didn't know which modules I needed to install, or indeed how to install them. Avoid dividing your code into different functions, even though I recognize this would normally be good programming practice. So often you end up with one or more different functions, and it can be hard to see how they tie together unless you're an experienced programmer. This will avoid that. So just create one long program. And then 3 things I want to avoid. List comprehensions. If you don't know what they are, lucky you. They're a very complicated way to do something where a much easier alternative exists. Pandas and NumPy, or NumPy, depending on which side of the Atlantic you come from, are 2 completely valid modules, but unless you're an experienced Python programmer, it's probably a good idea to avoid those unless you actually need them. And classes are a really complicated thing to do with object-oriented programming, and you really don't want to be looking at those in your code. And then I put do not think for longer. So that will avoid the situation where it comes up with a complicated solution where you just want a straightforward one. Add comments throughout your code for anything which isn't straightforward. It will probably do that anyway. And add a comment at the top of the code saying it was created by AI. And then I've included my website, which for this run is going to be pylonofthemonth.org, another of my favorite websites. So let's see if this all works. I haven't tested this out, so as always, things may go wrong. One of the problems is it says thinking for longer. So clearly my instruction, do not think for longer, needs a bit of reinforcement. And once more, it's come up with a slight error there. That must be a temporary bug in ChatGPT. And then the module. So it's told me the modules it's used, it's told me how to install them, that's great. It's got my comments saying created by AI. And then it's got the actual code, which is a single bit of code with no functions, and looks, to me, relatively easy to understand. So what I can now do is copy that and see if it actually works. So I'll create a new program, which I will call test2.py, and I'll paste in my code. And let's be brave, let's just try running this without any additional modifications. As I say, I haven't tested this, and it may be the case that that particular website doesn't actually have any. So I guess what I need to do to test that out is to change this to a website which I know absolutely does have some, mysl.co.uk, and try running this again. And that looks quite plausible. So I strongly recommend creating simpler versions of your programs unless you're an expert programmer, because at least then you'll be able to understand what's been created on your behalf and make changes to it to tweak it. If there's one thing AI tools are good at, it's debugging programs. Much better than you would be, I suspect, no offense, and certainly better than me. So I've got here a program which purports to read in this shopping list and print out the results. So when I ran the program, it told me bananas. I have 5 bananas at £1.20 each, giving me £6. Did the same thing for the other items and told me my total bill was £19.40. That's what it did yesterday. But someone's been playing around with the program, and now when I run it, it doesn't seem to work. What it should be doing is reading each row one by one. And for each row, it should create 3 variables giving the name of the item, the quantity bought, and the price. It should multiply the quantity times the price, and that should give me the total spending. But something's going wrong, and I can't see what. So it's opening the file like this. You might like to think as I'm going through what the 3 bugs this program contains are. It's reading in the line, and for each line, it's stripping it by the comma, so it's splitting it into the 3 different parts. And the first part is calling the item name, the second part is called quantity, and the third part it's called price, using a process called unpacking. It's then taking the total as a quantity times the price and printing out the results. So let's see if we can see what's going wrong. What I'm going to do is to copy this to the clipboard, and then I'm going to go to ChatGPT and paste it in. But before I do that, let's just ask it to add in a file, shopping.txt, so it knows what it's talking about, and then I can paste in my prompt. But I need to give it a bit of a guide as to what I want, so I'm going to say, why is this not working? Now, you notice I haven't explained what the program is trying to do, nor does it contain any comments saying that. It's just got the bare information. I haven't even said it's Python, and yet it's more than enough context for it, I suspect, to solve my problem. I probably didn't even need the shopping.txt. So if I run that program, after a very short while, it tells me, I hope, the 3 problems. The first problem is it's got incompatible data types. This won't work. The second problem, and the one it would crash on initially, is that I need to escape these characters within the file path, either by putting double slashes in or by putting the letter R in just there, which says, don't treat backslashes as escape characters, treat them as just backslashes. And the third problem, which I'm hoping to find somewhere down the line, yes, down here, I think it's probably explained somewhere else, it should start on the second line. You can see there, it's changed that 0 to a 1. What it was doing is reading the first lines, the headers, and treating that as a purchase, and trying to decipher that into numbers, which was failing. So it's come up with the 3 errors and come up with some fixed code. And I'm absolutely certain that if I run this, it seems to have done a few other tweaks as well, somewhat gratuitously. But if I now try running that, I hope you'll see that it gives me the correct answer. And it's added in some comments as well. So I've just saved myself wasting a great deal of time trying to find a bug when I could have gone away and made a cup of coffee, and ChatGPT could have done it for me much easier and more accurately. So what is refactoring code? It turns out to be remarkably useful given its strange name. I'm going to take the same program I wrote before and ask AI ChatGPT to rewrite it. Please rewrite the following Python code without changing what it does. Here's some things I'd like you to do. So I wanted to add blank lines and comments to make the code easier to read, improve my variable names, they're quite short, and where useful, split single lines into multiple lines to make the code easier to read. And then I put at the end, I repeat, the final code must do exactly the same thing, but it should be easier to read, maintain, test, and change. So let's see what it comes up with. After a second or two, I suspect. Here's a clearer, more maintainable rewrite of your script. The logic and output are exactly the same, but it's laid out for easier reading and future edits. And isn't it just so much easier to read? So it's changed QTY to quantity text, and then it cleverly introduced a variable called quantity, which refers to the numeric amount of the quantity, and it's done the same thing for the price. So I would say it's much easier to read. I'm going to copy it and see if it still does the same thing as the final check. So if I go into Visual Studio Code, I'm going to paste that into a new program I've called bettercalculation.py, and let's try running it to see if it actually works, and it does exactly the same thing. So refactoring is really good, particularly when you're looking at somebody else's code and you want to just put it in your own personal styles to make it easier to read. Just because a program works doesn't mean it's perfect. It might run slowly or be unreliable under certain circumstances, or just be not written in a very nice way. What you can do is ask Python to critique your code. And here's an example of a prompt you might use. So what this is doing is saying, please critique the following Python program. I need to provide that in a second. Things to consider. Is it using the best modules? So maybe you've chosen bad modules, which will make it less easy to write. Is it well written? I guess that's subjective. And will it run optimally, or will it take ages to run? Please present a list of up to 10 changes you'll make in a numbered list, beginning with the one which you think is most important. Finish by giving me a revised version of the program, incorporating as many of your changes as you can. So that's a standard prompt you could use to critique your programs. Here's what we're going to use it on. So I've got a program here which will actually convert all of the files in a folder from WebP format to PNG, and it works perfectly. What it does is loops over all the files in a folder returned by the glob module, and for each file it finds, it opens it up, image.open, and then it saves it, but using a different format. And it uses something called the pillow module to do that. So there's nothing wrong with it, apart from the fact maybe it could be better written. And it's a reasonably realistic example because this is something I wrote myself to solve a particular problem. I've no idea if it's well written. Let's find out. So I'm now going to go to the bottom of this prompt and paste in my program. And now I can try running this and see what it comes up with. I'm not going to get it to think longer for a better answer, because for things like this, I think the initial answer it comes up with quickly is usually adequate. So it's come up with 10 improvements. Now, I had a quick peek at this, and the first one I don't think is true. It says there's an incorrect keyword argument in save. It's not a valid argument each file equals true, and it will throw an error, but it doesn't, it works fine. So that's a bit of hallucination on the part of ChatGPT. Hallucination is becoming increasingly rare, but there's a good example of some. But some of the other points it's come up with, I'm sure, are very valid. I'm going to pick one out, error handling. No error handling exists. That's absolutely true. So if anything goes wrong in the conversion process, it will crash the script. So what it's done in its final version is added a try and an except block, which I'm sure is an improvement. If I now try copying that code in, back into Visual Studio Code just to see if it works, the previous one did, and if I try running this, it's converted all the files. And it actually has improved it because it's told me which files it's converted, the initial format and the final format. So it is definitely a better program. So I think even if you disagreed with everything else I've covered in this tutorial, and you think you're such a good programmer that you don't need AI tools, surely it's worth it for researching modules. Let me give you one example. Let's say I want to write a Python program which reads information in from a table in a SQL Server database and writes this after filtering and sorting to a new Excel workbook. What modules would I be best to use? This is the sort of thing I wonder all the time. I'm never quite sure if I'm using the most efficient modules, so what I'd probably do is spend about half an hour looking on the internet to see what all the possibilities were and which one works best. I think this is going to give me the answer instantly, so let's see what it does. To run that, here's a solid modern stack that covers all three parts of your task. And it's come up with the module PyODBC, which is what I would have used, and tells me why it would use it. That's really good. And how to use it. Then it tells me about using pandas, which is, again, an excellent suggestion for reading it in. And for writing it out to Excel, it's suggesting using pandas to Excel, which is probably much better than the way I would have thought of doing it. And again, it's given me the syntax for that. And at the bottom, it's given me a couple of alternative ideas. So it's brilliant at researching modules to use. And as I say, if you don't use it for anything else at all, use it to research which modules to use when you're attacking a new task. So I hope you've enjoyed that tutorial. I wish you joy of programming in Python with your new AI friend. And please do let me know how you get on. There's so much more on our website at wiseowl.co.uk, including blogs, shorter tips, tutorials on SQL and VBA, hundreds of exercises in all sorts of different software applications, and a chance to test your skills in a few selected software applications. In addition to all of that, you can watch our video tutorials like this one in all these different subjects. Or you could consider booking one of our training courses, whether it be classroom, on-site, or online, or even as one-to-one consultancy. Thank you for watching.